So, yes, I'm very excited to see what we get into today. We did an Instagram live yesterday with a couple of our speakers, and we had a fabulous conversation about research, a lot of the shortcomings. We talked about some of our wildest psychedelic liberation dreams, all kinds of stuff. So if you are following us on Instagram, People of Color Psychedelic Collective, you can catch the replay of that. So definitely check that out, follow us, join our email list, and get to know POCPC. We do a lot of wonderful things in the world. And we are just glad to be in the business of building community, offering safe spaces for all of these beautiful faces I see, all these wonderful people of color, all of y'all. Thank you for being here, for pouring into us. And we are about to pour into y'all. So, about this series. So this is our second event in um, the series. Today, Psychedelics Research and Resistance is hosted by People of Color Psychedelic Collective in partnership with Harvard University Law School's Petrie Flom Center's project on psychedelics law and regulation. This series consists of 3 online workshops exploring the intersections of research, policy, healing, and psychedelics. We had a previous event called Sacred Pathways, a journey through psychedelic care and healing modalities, and you can find that on YouTube. So if you go and search that title, and you can also link to it on our POCPC website. And then the final event of the series, will be announcing that soon. So make sure you're locked in with our email list or on social media so you can stay abreast of everything that we have going on. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Selma Phoenix, an entheogenic researcher, a drug policy advocate, medicine woman, psychedelic mindset coach, and much more. I reside in Chicago, land of Ojibwe, Adawa, and Potawatomi nations. I've had the pleasure of being on the journey of psychedelic self-discovery for many years, and I consider myself a student of life and its many mysteries. I'm a longtime member and current board president of People of Color Psychedelic Collective. And here we're a community focused on fellowship, education, and holding space for people of color to connect and share a love for psychedelic healing and exploration. So I'll tell you a little bit more about POCPC. Our goal is to bring psychedelic education to people of color. Our organization creates spaces for people of color to learn about the harms of the war on drugs and the healing properties of psychedelics. We are committed to helping build a healing infrastructure that centers care, affordability, and accessibility for communities of color while reducing harm. We provide outreach, events, and educational content created by and for people of color to further our collective knowledge. We aim to build a table instead of asking for a seat at another's table. So today, our learning objectives are to define resistance given the current historical context, explore current research directions and address POC engagement and involvement, defining psychedelic research in a way that works for us, expanding and deepening our understanding of research practices, and exploring how we share our research findings. So, as many of you may have seen recently, the current administration has fast-tracked areas of psychedelic research with the aim of mainstreaming psychedelics for the masses. So, to us, we believe it's crucial to highlight the current research landscape and the trajectories, and give a voice to some of the concerns surrounding how research is being conducted, how it's interpreted and presented, particularly from the lens of people of color. So that's why we have all these wonderful researchers here, folks who have lots of experience understanding research from a particular lens, both academic and having personal experiences with psychedelics, plant medicine, and who can, really give genuine thoughts, perspectives on this topic. Historically, mainstream research has a tendency to homogenize its findings and conclusions, be reductionist in its observations, and lack the nuance that is necessary for equitable representation. Today, we will highlight these issues and provide suggestions, solutions, and alternative frameworks by which people of color can learn to interpret data and make research accessible for everyone. We have a brilliant panel of speakers today, and their work runs the gamut of the research field. We have folks who do clinical research, folks who are focused on community building and research, folks who are deeply science-based, folks who have spent years in the Amazon. So we got a little bit of everything. So we're so excited to learn from them. I believe their perspectives will be very eye-opening and informative. And we're very, very thankful for everybody. So I'll pass the mic to one of our POC PC members, Arkayla, and she'll discuss the importance of research and give a little bit of a personal connection to the topic, just to kind of lay the groundwork so you all can get an understanding of why we're here today and, how this is deeply close to all of us. And, thank you, Arkayla. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Soma. That was a beautiful introduction. Hello, everyone. First and foremost, exhale. I know that I didn't even exhale. Thank you. I watched Liz exhale and I was like, wait, Arkayla, you didn't exhale. So first, second, I wanted to kind of open up the space today talking about how in my personal journey, I used to be really intimidated by research spaces. Thinking about academic research and clinical research, I was like, my degree is in communications, and I'm so not a researcher. And then I started attending psychedelic research events. And I realized that when I go to these research events, I don't have to be intimidated, especially when they are in environments like this, full of people of color who are excited to learn together. And second, I can keep up and I can learn quite a bit in these research spaces that I can then apply to my own practice of using plant medicine. So personally, I do live with a traumatic brain injury. Microdosing psilocybin has been my lifeline in navigating my brain injury, and attending research events really allows me to gain new insights on how I can utilize psychedelics in my own personal health journey. So for instance, I went to a research conference this past February, and there was someone who was presenting about when neuroplasticity peaks after a psilocybin journey. So many light bulbs went out for me, and I was actually able to create my own microdosing routine along with activities to do about 24 hours after my microdosing to support increasing my neuroplasticity. So that's just one example of how I use psychedelic research spaces to apply that knowledge to my own journey around plant medicine. And so I really wanted to kind of kick off the event with that. That way we all remember that even if you're not in a formal research setting, we are all literally doing research, right? Whether we're engaging with plant medicine or even just seeing if dairy works well with our tummy, right? We are going out and we are learning information about how we can best operate and navigate this world and applying the things that we learn to our day-to-day journey. So I'm really excited for this event. I know that I'm gonna learn so much. We have a phenomenal group of panelists coming in. And again, just remember that you do not have to be a formalized researcher. You don't have to have that actual title to be able to receive information and utilize it in your day-to-day life. That's what we're all doing, right? And so we're really excited to welcome you all. And I'm gonna pass it back to Soma to actually introduce our panelists. But don't forget, if you have any questions, drop them in our chat. Our wonderful member Thomas is keeping track of all those questions. If your question is for any particular panelist, make sure that you identify that so that we can do our Q&A at the very end. We'll be able to ask the correct panelists your questions. Thank you all so much and welcome to the space.
Thank you, Arkayla. We appreciate your perspective. I think that was one of the main things that we wanted to emphasize that you don't have to have a clinical background, you don't have to have a formal education in research and sciences. That research is something that should be accessible to everyone, and we're all researchers already. So, thank you so much for saying that. And now I'll introduce our first speaker, Dr. Rebecca Senanayaka. Dr. Rebecca is a cultural anthropologist and ethnobotanist working toward the flourishing of all species through decolonial inquiry into indigenous plant knowledge and altered states of consciousness. She has worked with 11 maestros across 5 indigenous traditions, including an apprenticeship with the Quechua as the first woman apprentice to a prominent Amazonian teacher. She's also completed 27 months of field work over a decade of engagement in remote Amazonia. Dr. Rebecca, we cannot wait to hear from you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Just pull my slides up. Full screen. Okay. Oh no. My apologies. Try
No worries, you can try again. And
that.
we can
How's
see
that
it.
looking?
We can see it. It looks great.
Okay, great. Is it still up?
It is.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Great. Thank you. And thank you so much, POCPC, for this wonderful invitation to be part of this conversation, and also the Petrie Flum Center for sponsoring this event. It is an incredible honor to be in this space, and I think what POCPC has really created here is truly unique. And I am incredibly grateful to contribute to this wonderful conversation. So, what I want to begin with is the question that has really organized the past decade of my research, and one that I think speaks directly to what this panel is exploring. So, how does a researcher trained in Western science come to understand Indigenous knowledge not as a belief, not as a worldview, not as material for interpretation, but with its own forms of methods, its own forms of measurements, and its own protocols for replication and falsification, and its own modes of knowledge transmission? So many academic disciplines encountering Indigenous knowledge systems have, for most of that time, engaged through frameworks that quietly assume Western science is the standard against which other knowledge systems are measured, whether this is done consciously or not. So, building on ethnobotany's tradition to take Indigenous ways of knowing seriously and ritual seriously, my research provides an alternative of long-term relationship with Indigenous colleagues, field sites, and in my case as well, plant intelligences. So by doing so, it hopes to mitigate the ethical and political concept of siloing sophisticated knowledge systems into a dominant form. It suggests that there is another way to do this work and generate productive results. It might just require a bit more time, a bit more humility, and a bit more uncertainty. So today I will be sharing with you my research journey from early Amazonian engagement to completing my doctorate, and I look forward to a hearty discussion after the presentations with my fellow panelists. So to begin with, I'll share a bit with you on my own positionality to understand where my research comes from and who is looking at this data. So ethnically, I am Sri Lankan. I was born in New Zealand and raised in Australia. I was educated between New Zealand and Australia. My heritage carries a long history with plant care spanning thousands of years, where plants are not separate from human existence, rather, they hold a central place in how we form our very societies. And because I have lived in so many different places, and the color of my skin, my height, my accent, my way of doing things, I am often cast as an other in these contexts. And this extends to my field site, where my field collaborators did not call me a gringa, a term for Western foreigners, but extranjera, someone else who was simply other. This also allowed for a unique shared connection to dimensions of the culture that we both share, despite age, geography, and education. So my advanced academic training began in cultural psychology. I was relieved to find a discipline which sought to dismantle the systematic biases in psychological science. I was also filled with curiosity as I read about more and more cultures around the world with different ways of doing fundamental things. It is a hybrid discipline born from the fieldwork methods of anthropology and quantitative and qualitative psychological analysis tools. But for my doctorate, where I intended to study the very system of Amazonian traditional knowledge, short-term fieldwork was not going to cut it, nor would it have actually been respectful. I needed to move to anthropology, a humanities discipline which allowed for long-term fieldwork and prioritizes relationship building. I followed a very traditional anthropological one-year-long fieldwork research trip as part of my doctoral research. And throughout my university education, I had taken courses in anthropology, which allowed for this transition to happen. So it was a methodological decision, and it was a decision based on which discipline would serve the research and, more importantly, the relationships best. So, over the past decade, I have spent 27 months in the Peruvian and Colombian Amazon, working with 11 maestros from 5 indigenous groups. This work was conducted across multiple field visits rather than a single intensive period, and each return strengthened the pre-existing relationships. A large portion of my time in the field has been spent developing relationships and trust. Because my research engages with medicinal systems, I spent time finding where locals go to take medicines and who they trust. This required a lot of presence in the field, patience, and openness to connection. It was after those relationships had been made that more formal research relationships were explored. So long field work with return over years produces different knowledge. It produces relationships in which trust is built incrementally, in which the researcher is gradually allowed access to deeper layers of the community's life, and in which the researcher's own assumptions are repeatedly challenged and reformed. It also reshapes the body of the researcher, and because I work with altered states of consciousness, including some of the strongest psychoactive plants known to humankind, long-term fieldwork builds the fortitude and tolerance of the body that it needs to go deeper and to undertake apprenticeship to the depths it requires. So my fieldwork involved at most parts ayahuasca ceremonies twice a week and several intensive dietas with restrictions on food, behavior, and human contact. This is the methodological and embodied investment that taking Indigenous knowledge seriously on its own terms actually requires. So when it came to actually doing the research, I did not arrive in the field with a predefined research plan and ask the Indigenous communities I worked with to fit into it themselves. I arrived with suggestions that were open to consultation, and the research questions, the structure of engagement, the topics that became central, all of this were developed through dialogue with my Indigenous colleagues and enacted through Indigenous ways of knowing. They are the experts with thousands of years of psychoactive plant experience, not I. So at points during my fieldwork, my collaborators shared knowledge with me that was only for me to receive and not for the academy, and they informed me that it should not be written down. So I followed their guidance, and it was these micro acts that kept building trust between us. Although this sounds relatively straightforward, unfortunately this is often not the case. Much academic engagement with Indigenous knowledge, even work that aspires to be ethical and decolonial, still arrives with the questions already formed, the implicit hierarchy already there on who knows and who doesn't. The community is consulted on access and content, but the intellectual architecture of the research remains the researchers. So, to genuinely allow Indigenous knowledge holders to shape the research is to actually give up control over what that research will become. And unfortunately, some structures are not designed to support this. Beyond the methodological consultation, I did not limit my engagement to the domain of traditional medicines. I sought to understand the wider community within which these profound altered states of consciousness were situated and normalized. And it became clear to me through the relationships I built and the time I spent that the knowledge I was trying to understand was bigger than just the plant medicine ceremonies. It was an entire way of being, of knowing, and existing. The maestro is a specialist node within a wider web of human and more than human relationships. And I found that to understand what he does or she does, you have to understand what the community does, what the plants do, and what the relationship between them produce. And this takes time. So, within this longer arc of relationship building, I was eventually invited into a formal apprenticeship with my primary teacher, a prominent Lamista Quichua maestro, Dom Roberto Corral Vargas, as his first female apprentice. This invitation came after years of relationship building and was itself an expression of Indigenous guided methodology, as my pursuit of more serious study with the plants actually came through a shared vision between him and I. I did not ask for apprenticeship. It was something that was offered when the conditions were right and when my teachers, both plant and human, decided I was ready. The apprenticeship involved the intensive rites of dieta and leads to the substantial portion of my dissertation. The conditions of apprenticeship, its protocols, its embodied requirements, are how the knowledge is actually transmitted in the Amazonian traditional knowledge system. If I entered the field site with my own way on how I thought things should be done and knowledge shared, I would have missed this incredible rite of apprenticeship, which holds phenomenal significance for our understanding of multi-species pedagogy and interspecies communication. So, as with Amazonian traditional knowledge, where the body is the instrument, I was given the opportunity to understand plant intelligence from the inside. So, when my initial methodology was being co-developed, my field collaborators requested to see the dissertation for final verification of technical details before it was published. For this reason, my dissertation still remains embargoed, and this final process involves time and funding to return to the field site and undertake these consultations. I was incredibly grateful to find the institutional frameworks towards the end of my dissertation to support the embargo of this thesis until this crucial aspect of Indigenous collaborative research could be done. That support in itself is a form of institutional resistance to extractive defaults, and it is worth naming because it shows that this methodology can be held within Western academic structures when those structures are willing to accommodate. So, to be able to present in due course the 100,000 words of doctoral level research to an Amazonian maestro with 40 years of experience will almost certainly lead to the generation of even more knowledge. So, to tie this all together, I wanted to share with you some of the key theoretical contributions that were born from this Indigenous-led research. And it was really born from a decade of really intensive interspecies engagement. These are concepts that were not brought to the field. Instead, they emerged from sustained engagement with Indigenous teachers, plant teachers, from the apprenticeship I took, and were then articulated in anthropological theoretical language. They are bottom-up ways of knowing from Indigenous perspectives. So the first major theoretical contribution is extended multi-species liminality, and this took seriously what Amazonian maestros had been telling me for the past decade. It was the plants that told us, it was the plants that speak to us, it is us that listen. So what I observed from them and from undertaking the rite of apprenticeship myself was that human consciousness begins to merge with the consciousness of the plants through these intensive rituals. And it is in this condition that makes their knowledge and their leadership possible. The second contribution is ritual osmosis, which is where the plants teach the practitioner directly, and a ritual creates the conditions for it. This has a way of destabilizing the centrality of the human in this experience. The human is no longer the most important part, rather, it is the ritual and the expertise that guides this connection. Once again, that's another way of looking at the hierarchy of the natural world, and it was born from indigenous ways of knowing up. The third is cortar and cruzar, so the concepts of cutting and crossing, so what happens when the protocols of apprenticeship are transgressed. And this taps into plants being sentient, plants having agency, plants being able to retaliate, and it's taken on the terms of the field itself. What it importantly produces is falsifiability, and it shows that the Indigenous knowledge system has its own mechanism for testing and refining itself that has been operating for a very long time that a lot of modern science is just catching up to. So these three contributions together form the methodological argument woven through this presentation, in that Indigenous knowledge, engaged on its own terms, generates theory that Western methodology alone cannot reach. Extended multi-species liminality, ritual osmosis, and cortar and cruzar are not Western theoretical impositions on Indigenous practice. Rather, they are articulations of what Indigenous teachers have been doing and knowing all along, built from the ground up. The work on the researcher in this space is to be present long enough, with enough humility and enough institutional protection of the relationships, that this knowledge can be held in the academic register without it being extracted from the conditions that it produced. So, at the end of the day, resistance to the assumption that Western science is the only science. It is resistance to the methodologies that translate before they listen, and most importantly, is resistance through long, deliberate, slow relational work that takes Indigenous knowledge seriously as the sophisticated science it has always been. It is about bridging worlds. Thank you.
Beautiful, Dr. Rebecca. We appreciate your wisdom so, so much. You said so many beautiful things, and what sticks out to me most is your emphasis on building layers of trust with the maestros and the communities, and how this takes time and patience, something that the Western world can't truly appreciate given our habits of moving at the speed of light through our days and nights. So thank you for giving us that perspective. You also mentioned the concept of giving up control of what the research would become, which we know is almost in direct opposition to how the Western world approaches research with the hypothesis method. So before you even start the research, they're telling you what the research and the conclusion is going to be, right? Instead of opening up the process of just seeing what comes to you. So thank you so much for giving that insight into Indigenous traditions and how they are able to bridge the gaps, right, between our consciousness, plant consciousness, and all of these other wonderful things. So next we will have our speaker, Liana, pardon me, Liana Tullis Robinson. Sorry, y'all. All right. Liana is a doctoral candidate in the counseling psychology program at Western Michigan University, community educator, and founder of the platform Excited About Entheogens. Her work centers on expanding inclusive conversations around psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, healing, spirituality, and community care through a culturally responsive lens. Liana, take it away.
Wonderful, wonderful. It is so beautiful to see so many people here supporting this event. So thank you all so much. And as it has been shared, it's really an honor to contribute to and to be a part of this panel today. So we're here today to talk about resistance. And when I hear the word resistance, I actually think of two different definitions. I think the first one many of us here are familiar with, and that is resistance as it stands to be an action, right? Resistance as a force, resistance as a verb, something that we do, right? We resist against something, or we say no as a form of resistance to set our boundaries. But the other form of resistance that I will also be talking about today and doing a bit of storytelling around is intrinsic resistance. So when resistance stands to elucidate something within us that is calling for us to grow, to change, or to evolve. And so in my personal and professional experiences, I have experienced both forms of resistance. And so ultimately, I define resistance as an initiator, intrinsically and externally. And so, from my personal and professional storytelling, I want to tell you why and how. So, first and foremost, to begin, and just to briefly reintroduce myself, my name is Leanna Tullis Robinson, and I'm a doctoral candidate in the counseling psychology program at Western Michigan University. So, it's this like university that's in the Midwest in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It's about 2 hours out from Detroit. And can you imagine what it's like to be a bubbly Black girl, spiritualist, walking into this university and saying, I'm going to study psychedelics? Right? I think that that is resistance that will show up right from the get-go. And I can verifiably tell you that, yes, that was a part of my experience. So, the first form of resistance that I personally and professionally want to talk with you all about is academic resistance. So, perhaps there are some of us in the crowd who are very interested in trailblazing psychedelic science and research in places where it hasn't been before. But from my personal and professional experiences, I want to tell you that yes, we can do that. But we will also need to tap into the form of resistance that is a force, because resistance will be projected at us as it has been projected at me. So, there are many things that I can kind of reference here, but in my experience of academic resistance, there have been many microaggressions that I have endured. Right. So, for instance, until I formalized my dissertation proposal, which investigates BIPOC perceptions of psychedelic therapy, I had members of my own dissertation committee label psychedelic research as hocus pocus, right? And how demoralizing and offensive is that? Because that literally then references the anthropological frameworks that would label psychedelic ceremony as culturally savage until it is actually put into the words and terms that align with Eurocentric research values. Then they were able to understand that the psychedelic research that I am conducting is honorable. Right. So there are those microaggressions that I've had to endure and that I have experienced, and that may show up for others as well. The other form of academic resistance that I want to bring up too is that when I actually introduced that I was wanted to do this dissertation research, I had to actually restructure my entire dissertation committee because faculty members felt as though, this isn't what my specialty is. I don't know how to help you here. So I had to again conjure up within myself the resiliency to resist back and to say, okay, well, you don't know. Well, then I'll give you a presentation. So now you do. So now you will know that I'm very interested in psychedelic research. And if I need to educate you along the way so that I can trailblaze this door and open it up for others, well, then fine. You know what? I will do so. And so that's the first form of resistance that I wanted to talk about, this layer of academic resistance. And even more so, right, I pushed the envelope because I am a qualitative researcher. So I didn't think that it would be accessible for me to throw out a survey or to just, do something more quantitative in that sense. I felt really drawn to do qualitative foundational work on how BIPOC folks actually perceive psychedelic therapy so that the researchers that come after me can build upon that foundation. So The second form of resistance that I wanted to talk about and to bring forth today is that layer of intrinsic resistance. And in this process, I want to reference the podcast that I created called Excited About Entheogens. So, as you can imagine, while I was finishing my coursework at this university, I felt incredibly silenced and outcasted from the microaggressions and from feeling like I had this spotlight on me where I had to continuously just perform and perform perfectly. Otherwise, I felt like something would happen as though I'm on thin ice already. So when I was in class and when I was, being educated in the courses and even talking with my own dissertation committee, I felt incredibly silenced and I didn't know how to bring my spiritual self forward into this academic setting. And so once again, I felt the flame within me, right? I felt the energy would come up within me to then create and to conjure that space. So excited about entheogens was all actually born from my own need to integrate after my psilocybin experience because I didn't know where to talk about it. So essentially, when when I was in this program and in these courses, I ended up recording at the same time 2 seasons of episodes where I spoke with Black and Brown folks and other researchers in the psychedelic field about multi-dimensional identity, about the inner guidance system, about the properties of ceremony, about spiritual hygiene because I actually needed those conversations to sustain me in this program. But even though I finished 2 seasons of recordings, right? I still felt that cognitive dissonance from these microaggressions and from the systemic oppression in academia. How could I still be a researcher and also be talking about such mystical experiences and terms? And so I actually sat on those 2 seasons of episodes for 9 months. It took me 9 months to actually go through and to listen to my own voice, to watch myself have these conversations, and to edit the videos. And so graciously, with a lot of encouragement from the guests that I had on this podcast, they were like, Liana, it's been like 6 months. Like, where is this? What are you doing? And so I had to actually transmute and work through the intrinsic resistance that I felt myself to say, you know what? I am feeling called to show up with a multidimensional identity as a researcher. And so I had to answer that call. And that is what Excited About Entheogens was born from. So, with the last remaining time that I have here, I also want to talk about the third form of resistance that comes up within me, and that is medical resistance. So, resistance to the American healthcare system in and of itself. And I ended up working through that form of resistance by creating what I call Our Healing Matters. So I am the founder and the leader of Our Healing Matters, and it is a community initiative and civil service project where I partner with community organizations, for their events that they're hosting, for festivals. I grab a mic and I interview community members about how they heal. So not necessarily how they've been medicalized, not necessarily the treatments that they have endured, but how have you actually healed during the worst times in your life? And interestingly enough, from these interviews, I have found that people do not necessarily reference the American healthcare system. They actually reference their wider ecosystems. So for me to just do a little bit of storytelling about how Our Healing Matters came to be, 3 years ago, I actually dropped out of the doctorate program because of medical issues. I had to take a medical leave. And it started with nerve pain that I felt in my left hand and my pinky. And so I went to the doctor, and of course, they're like, oh, you're a doctorate student, you do a bunch of typing, this must be carpal tunnel. So I went to Walgreens, I bought that $40 wristband or whatever that we all have to buy. I wore it for a week, and the doctor said, come back after a week and you could take it off. So I returned after a week. I took off that wristband, but the nerve pain returned with a vengeance. So it actually traveled from my left pinky to the entirety of my left hand, to my wrist, up through my forearm, through the back of my arm. And then as the days went by, it traveled up through my shoulder blades into the left side of my neck, and then it found its home in the left side of my face. And so I had to take a medical leave because I was experiencing vertigo and my neck stiffened to the point where the only thing that I could do was lay down or sit in the shower to clean myself. So I don't know how many of you have had to navigate the American healthcare system when doctors truly do not know or they're a bit dumbfounded about how to create treatment for you. But it is incredibly demoralizing and scary. So I underwent 2 surgeries. My mother had to come out to take care of me while I was on medical leave. And even still after those surgeries, the nerve pain did not subside. So that's when I actually finally decided to turn to plant medicine. So my mother was my caretaker. I grabbed her and I was like, we're going to Jamaica because nothing else is working and I'm not going to have my blood drawn another time. I'm not doing another MRI. And so we went out to Jamaica, and after one session of 3 grams of psilocybin, I was able to move my neck again. And my nerve pain actually reduced by 70%. And that has still been sustained to this day. And so Our Healing Matters is very personal to me. It's very emotional to me because that was my dark night of the soul. I didn't know if I was going to come out of that, and I felt devastated that I had to take a medical leave after 10 years of hard work just to get this degree. So again, Our Healing Matters was created in a form where I was resisting against the American healthcare system to say, you didn't know how to heal me. Let me go to my neighbor and elucidate the conversation of how we actually heal in community. So I do have a bit more to share, but could I have a time check really quick?
You're doing great. You still got about 4 minutes.
4 minutes? Perfect. So I'm going to share this here. I think it's loading. Oh, there we go. It's a bit slow. There we have it. And let me open this up here. Just have to move a couple things around. Okay, so it should pop up. Okay, and get a bit bigger there. Perfect. So my transition here is, as I shared from Our Healing Matters, people didn't necessarily reference that they felt as though they healed from their doctor or from being put on indefinite medication. In fact, people shared that they healed by engaging with their wider ecosystems. So for my dissertation that investigates BIPOC perceptions of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, the theoretical framework or the theoretical grounding for my research is the ecological systems theory. So ecological systems theory was first developed as a way for us to understand, okay, when we step outside and we interact with the wider ecosystems around us, how does that actually influence our development? And it was actually originally developed, interestingly, for childhood development. But for my dissertation, I wondered, what would it look like if I actually placed a group at the center? And then I contextualized this ecological systems theory within psychedelic care. So my hypothesis here and what I anticipate as I'm currently collecting data for my dissertation is that when we are providing prep, holding space for people of color, and then helping them to integrate their psychedelic experiences, we can not only look at them on an individual level, we need to look at how they are interacting with the greater ecosystems that they find themselves within. Because all of these layers of ecosystems are actually influencing how BIPOC folks even perceive psychedelic therapy and psychedelic care itself. So for example, you'll see that it is color coded here with the systems that are on the right. So I created this diagram on the left myself. So for my dissertation research, I'm interviewing BIPOC folks in focus groups to ask them about their microsystem, which is their immediate environment. And my hypothesis here is that we can define perceptions by the immediate environment that BIPOC folks find themselves within. So I will be interviewing folks, or I am interviewing folks, about their attitudes on psychedelics, their openness to the new experience of psychedelics, whereas openness to new experiences is actually a personality trait. And then their levels or their experiences currently of psychological distress, which can actually serve as a motivator for BIPOC folks to engage in psychedelic therapy. I'm just going to check the chat here. Okay. So as we start to look at the wider ecosystems here, we can check the mesosystem, right? So it is this brown, darkish brown color that is here. And so the mesosystem theory represents the connect microsystems. So this is when you, as a person or as a group of people, interacts with their neighbor. They interact with the schooling system, and they interact with their teachers, their neighbors. So a cultural adaptation of ecological systems theory within or situated within psychedelic therapy, we can reference, right? Interacting with our family ancestry on a mesosystemic level will influence how BIPOC folks perceive psychedelic therapy. What about historical harm? Communities that were exploited, communities where incarcerated individuals were exploited in the name of psych research. That historical harm will also influence how BIPOC folks perceive psychedelic therapy. So as you can see, there are wider and wider ecosystems that we actually find ourselves within. And I want to say the implications of this, and I guess this will be the last thing that I say here. I'm just checking the time, excuse me. So I will say here that, the wider ecosystems that we get into, we need to make sure that we are taking all of these ecosystems into consideration when we are supporting people of color, because we have been influenced by psychedelic science, research, and our ancestral connections, our oral histories that we have with psychedelics. And all of those factors will influence how we perceive psychedelic therapy, how we show up in psychedelic therapy. And ultimately, I want to use this conceptual framework to optimize psychedelic therapy for BIPOC folks. This way, when we enter into this space, this friction between mysticism and conventional psychotherapy, when we enter into it, we're not just seen as an individual, we are seen holistically. And we need to be seen holistically when we have our prep, when someone's holding space, and then when we actually return back to our respective ecosystems. So thank you, everyone. I hope that I made good time there. Thank you.
You did wonderful, Liana. Thank you so, so much. Your courage and resilience is admirable, and you are definitely a trailblazer, and we appreciate your perspective so much. What I found really interesting about your story about going to Jamaica is that our indigenous tradition, specifically the Mazatec tradition made popular by Maria Sabina, they use psychedelics to heal not only mental and emotional ailments, but legitimately physical concerns. So someone would go to the shaman or curandera and they take the medicine and it would be able to basically hunt out where in their body the something was either stuck or there was a blockage, or their healing was being impeded in some way. So it's very ancestral, the approach that you took to find your healing in a way that Western medicine was unable to do. So thank you so, so much for your story. I think that can be very inspirational for folks who they may have reached the end of their rope with Western medicine, but there's still so many other options out there. So thank you very much, Liana. That was a beautiful story, and we love the work that you're doing and support you in it. Next, we will have Arkayla introduce an interactive activity called a word cloud. Arkayla, please delight us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you to our first two panelists. I don't know if you guys can see my facial expressions, but I'm getting excited for all the things I'm going to go look up after this. So just a lot of gratitude to our first two presenters. So I'm sure most people on this call have heard of something called a word cloud. So we're going to take a second between our sets of panelists to actually create a word cloud. And this word cloud we're going to create is going to answer the question, what's one word you would use to describe the current climate of psychedelic research? I'm going to drop that in the chat. And then I invite folks to send over their one word in the chat. I will be collecting each of those words and putting them into my word cloud generator. So the reason behind this activity is that we want to be documenting how we're feeling about psychedelic research because we can change the field. And so as we go throughout this entire event, we're documenting all the different ways that folks are feeling about the climate of psychedelic research so that we can work to change it and we can work to do something different. So again, I dropped the question in the chat. What is one word you would use to describe the current climate of psychedelic research? And I will drop it again. Thank you to the folks who have sent things. Yes, wild. Thank you to the folks who have sent words in the chat already. I am typing them as you all send them. Oh, let's see. I don't know why your chat is disabled. Nina, who just messaged me, but if you want to send it directly to me, because I see that you're able to send it to me and we can work on getting that fixed for you. Of course. Elitist is a great word. Thank you. I'm typing at the speed of light over here. I'm seeing everyone's chat is disabled. So you guys can just DM me all of these things and we will work on troubleshooting that in 1 second. Apologies there. Continue sending those words and we'll figure out what's going on with the chat. Anyone else? Again, the question is what's one word you would use to describe the current climate of psychedelic research? I'll pause for about another minute, see if anyone else has words. Thank you. And yep, we can figure out if we have some settings that we need to change as to why some folks are only able to DM me, but also feel free to DM me these words and your questions as we troubleshoot that.
Okay, I think folks are able to add to the chat now. I'm seeing them roll in.
Yeah, seeing a lot more.
Beautiful. Thank you all for your patience with us.
Thank you. Yep. There you go. Thank you all. Take one more minute. I love the comment here about sunlight and psilocybin being a game changer. Game changer, yes. Okay, perfect. Still getting some other words rolling in here. Thank you, Dr. Janelle. Complicated has come up quite a few times. I feel like we're all in agreement on that one. All right. Any other last words before I generate our word cloud? Thank you, Liana. Politicized is great. Okay. All right, I'm gonna do a countdown. Oh, yes, thank you. There we go. Okay. And 10, 9, 8, 7, drop those final thoughts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right. So let me generate this word cloud for us. Give me just 1 second. Uh-oh. And then I'll share my screen so we can all take a second and look at it. Okay, just 1 second. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Can you all see my screen? If
We
not, let me.
can. Yes.
Perfect. Awesome. So here are the words that are coming up for us when we think about the current field of psychedelic research. I just want to take a second and let everyone read over this. Think about what this means. What can we do with these emotions and feelings about psychedelic research? And also think about who needs to know this? Who needs to know that this is how people of color see the field of psychedelic research? So again, I'll give us another couple minutes to just look at this. We can share this after the meeting as well. From my own perspective, this doesn't feel positive, right? It doesn't feel like we're all super excited about the field of psychedelic research. It sounds like there's a lot of work to be done to make this field of psychedelic research reflect what we actually want to see happen in the psychedelic space. Thank you for those continuing to drop words. Again, we will be sharing this after. So I'll let you guys take another second to look, and then I'm going to pass the mic back to Soma. Thank you for participating in this. We will continue on with the rest of our panelists so we can see some of the more positive sides of psychedelic research and the people of color who are conducting it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Arkayla. That was kind of eye-opening, right? And I would be very curious to see what a word cloud from actual researchers, right, who like the mainstream researchers, what would their thought process be? I'm sure it would be hopeful, groundbreaking, unseen, unheard of, like a renaissance, cutting edge, right? Transformative. Exactly. It would be very much in opposition to what we know to be the reality. So thank you all so much for giving these words, because we know words have power, and I think this really is illustrative of what the reality is with psychedelic research, and kind of we have our work cut out for us. So next we have the beautiful Dr. Miyabi Shields. Dr. Miyabi is a pharmaceutical scientist specializing in the structural biochemistry of the endocannabinoid system for the past 16 years. Dr. Miyabi has academic, industrial, and personal experience with cannabis as medicine. Miyabi is passionate about public education, science, and advocacy, and has reached over 6 million people through social media and podcasts, educating them on the therapeutic benefits of cannabis and psychedelics for neurodivergent brains. Dr. Miyabi, we are glad to have you.
Hi, thanks so much. Let me just share. Oh, wait, I'm gonna just share this. I'm really excited. I'm gonna have to get going because I have heard quite repeatedly that my talks are like drinking from a fire hose. So I'm gonna try to just go through it. I'm gonna talk about from biochemistry to reality, from the lab to reality, like what is the value? And when I think of resistance, and what I'm gonna come back to at the end is what is the value of my field? What is the value of biochemistry? And what is the value of lived experiences, which is where I've been focusing more of my energy in the last 3 or 4 years, of endocannabinoid system and serotonin system synergy and how they work together. On the left of the screen on the very left is psilocybin, the molecule, the active component in mushrooms. And then this is serotonin in the middle. And on the right are a bunch of different beautiful varieties of mushrooms, different types of psilocybin containing mushrooms. And when I think of resistance, and when I was asked to speak, and I was so excited to speak at this, is one of the things I feel resistant to is psychedelics research, mainly because of my field and how it is to be part of my field. So before I start, I want to say I am the co-founder of a nonprofit, the Network of Applied Pharmacognosy. Some of our data will be in here. I'm a private consultant within the natural products industry. and I'm a professor at a research university. But everything that I have to say here today, I cannot emphasize this enough, is going to be my own perspectives, because I'm about to say stuff here that, like, I'm assuming tons of people I work with don't stand by. So everything I have to say is just my perspectives of it. Psychedelics have helped me decolonize my mind in a huge way. I'm very much so the product of World War II and of colonialism and forced assimilation. My families have both sides have been in America for over 100 years, and I am and was very much so brainwashed. And psychedelics have been one of the biggest awakenings for me, not just for my mental health and healing from trauma, and as I mentioned in the chat earlier, my TBI history, but also in awakening my identity, who I am at my core, and what is my main issue with my field of science, and why have I constantly been leaving my place in research to be like, this isn't right. And it kind of helped that all come together. So I'm excited to speak about a little bit of the science and about the real world experience today. So I'm going to start with biochemistry. We're going to look at serotonin, the endocannabinoid system. Then I'm going to go through lived experience. So I'm going to start with serotonin. The classic serotonergic psychedelics is a huge class. And I'm going to start about to just explain, like, what is my expertise and what do I do. This is like a point of view video of what it looks like when I'm in the lab. I do in vitro research. So that's drug discovery. In vitro means in a test tube. And earlier we were talking about, Liana mentioned academic resistance, and Dr. Rebecca mentioned, like, the perspective when you go into research. And I cannot stress it enough that I did not understand how, when I went in to become a pharmaceutical scientist as a PhD, I did not actually understand at a core what drug discovery was until I was doing my PhD. And a lot of the core of this is looking at the molecules and how at the atomic scale they interact with the receptors. So I am going to talk about that. That is my expertise, and that's the work that I do here. But I also want to emphasize that what is the value of it? And that's the question that I want to come back to all of us to discussing later, is what is the value of that? And what value are you generating when you do that? So what we're looking at here is binding data. I have depicted it in a way. I developed my own unique algorithm for depicting the different binding affinities. That's how closely do these molecules bind to the receptors. And I used LSD as one of the normalizing factors because it's so potent. It's really, really strong. So when I was making these images, I used LSD as the one to start and begin with. All of the data is publicly available. This is on a publicly available data set. It's called the PDSP. If anyone really wants to go look it up, it's a bunch of numbers, but it's basically one lab that has put together a big database of binding affinities. That's how strongly do these molecules bind to the receptors. And then on the outside, you have all the different receptors. So 5-HT are serotonin receptors. Anything you say there that says 5-HT, those are serotonergic receptors. Specifically, the 5-HT2A receptor is the one that is the most closely linked to psychedelic effects, both euphoric effects and like any sort of visual effects. I also have the adrenergic receptors on here, alpha and beta, and then some of the dopamine receptors. So LSD is the most potent, the most promiscuous. It's really strong, right? A tab is only like 100 micrograms. That's not a lot, as opposed to you need in a much higher quantities of the other active molecules like psilocin, which is the active metabolite of psilocybin. You can see here there is no D2 activity of psilocin, and then it can be less stimulating in general. There's less adrenergic activity as well. And you can kind of see that the profile is shifting, right? Like from one to the other. Yes, they hit serotonin receptors, and they're hitting a lot of serotonin receptors, but they're hitting them in different varying amounts and different strengths. And what this leads to when it's in our bodies and our brains is that, like, the molecule is just floating around there, and it's interacting with receptors based on these affinities. So as you have more molecules present, they're going to interact with them based on how closely and easily they bind. And so you can see that there are differences between LSD and psilocin. And the last one I have an image for is DMT. Many living beings, including us, will produce DMT endogenously, means we're producing it ourselves. You can see that these bars are a lot lower. You need a lot more to reach the effect. In general, it's another reason why traditional preparations often include, or typically include, an MAOI inhibitor that is a different molecule that actually prevents DMT from being broken down. And that's what allows it to be present in higher amounts and lead to therapeutic effects. So this, in a nutshell, if you put them all together, shows that you have these different receptor affinities for the different molecules. They lead to different perceived effects. But one of the things that I think is the most important thing to point out about serotonin and the serotonin system and serotonergic psychedelics specifically is that, as we were mentioning, like, what would the standard research be saying about the psychedelics industry? Everyone thinks it's a breakthrough for mental health. And like, first of all, the breakthrough thing is a misnomer because other communities have known for thousands and thousands of years. So is it really a breakthrough, or is it just, Western science deciding that they're breaking through it now? But it's also pretty much known that these receptors that interact with the classic serotonergic psychedelics, at least all the receptors that are circled right here, there is a psychiatric pharmaceutical medicine on the market already for those receptors. So we actually know already that within the Western medicine construct, they've already profited and patented and marketed drugs that target these specific receptors for a bunch of other psychiatric indications. And that one of the reasons why everyone's interested in psychedelics now is because the patents ran out. That is undeniably one of the reasons why. In addition, when you like are targeting these one specific things over instead of targeting everything, you're going to not only get a different effects profile, but you're kind of throw things off balance. And I'm going to get off topic here because now we're getting into chemical diversity, and that's more in the natural products realm. And I could give an entire hour-long presentation on why there are advantages to natural products in chemical diversity, and that all of these pharmaceutical drugs that are targeting each of these one targets specifically, while I don't think that it's wrong to have them, and I don't think that I think that they have their own value, I think that the shortcomings are also fairly clear, and that when you look at the classic serotonergic psychedelics, there's somehow, and at least in theory, in my mind, I'm looking at this and I'm saying there's an advantage here to being what is called a pan agonist, or something that hits all the serotonin receptor subtypes, not just serotonin 1A, 1B. Really, really common ones are like migraine medications that only hit one type of serotonin receptor, right? Another one would be the antiemetic, the anti-nausea medications, like, what is that really? Sonendastron is Zofran. Zofran is the trade name. Those are things that target just like one of those receptors instead of something that targets all of them. And so what I want to wrap up with this is just showing that the classic serotonergic psychedelics in my field of study have already had a proven molecular mechanism. The issue that people have with them is that they hit all of the receptors. And so the issue is that they've hit specifically 2A, which is the subtype that's associated with both euphoria and visual effects, along with a lot of other components like mysticism and other positive things. So that's another part. But something I'm pretty interested in as an endocannabinoid system structural biochemist was that we recently, within the last, I think it's like 10 or 15 years, have discovered that these receptors will join with CB1. They heterodimerize, just meaning, and I'm going to cover this in more detail later too. It means they come together and they actually signal together. And I think that that's super interesting too, especially when we take into account the synergy that people experience between cannabis and serotonergic psychedelics, and that there is an overlap in the therapeutic benefit that a lot of people are utilizing both of these natural medicines for. A lot of people, meaning like myself and my community, because research is research. So now I'm going to look a little bit about the endocannabinoid system. What is the synergy with the serotonin system? And the first sign that there was synergy came from the shared mechanism. Both the endocannabinoid system and the serotonin system, and you can see I've abbreviated them here. 5-HT stands for serotonin, ECS is endocannabinoid system. Both of them control body temperature and feeding behavior, sleep and arousal, and then like emotional processes. This is just like, those are the big things. They also control a number of other smaller things together, like appetite and like nausea and emetic properties. And I could keep going on and on, so I'll stop there. But the first question was, is it serotonin that is leading to effects in the endocannabinoid system, or is it the endocannabinoid system that's leading to effects in serotonin? And one of the first things that people found was that the endocannabinoid system is upstream in a lot of different processes, meaning that like you need the endocannabinoid system to affect the serotonin system, then the serotonin system will go on and do everything that it does. But then later, we've found that there's longer downstream processes in the serotonin system that then will go back and interact with the endocannabinoid system. And what I personally lean towards as a visual, at least maybe, I would say that let's get rid of this entirely. Let's stop considering these as separate systems. And this also goes for dopamine. This also goes for glutamate. This also goes for GABA. It is my opinion that in my field specifically, the more we have discovered about these systems, the more we've discovered that they all are just part of our own regulation and part of our own cohesion of homeostasis. How are we maintaining balance? And that each of these systems, while they are separate in the sense that we have unique molecules in our own bodies that interact with them, whereas we have unique molecules that we take exogenously that are tools, that are medicines that help us, that interact specifically with them. None of these systems is ever operating on its own. They're more operating together. And so what does that look like for what I was mentioning with heterodimerization? Because this is actually the most the most like granular you can get when you zoom into the actual receptors. The actual receptors bind together like a transformer and have a different reaction. So here on the left, I would have the CB1 receptor, and when it's activated, it's leading to an endocannabinoid system response. Then you have the serotonin receptor. Specifically here, I'm looking at 5-HT2A and 2C. When it's being activated, you have a serotonin specific response. And then you have a heterodimer. They come together. They are physically linked together, and physically, chemically, electrically, those are all the same thing when we're at the atomic scale. They get linked together, and then you'll get a mixed or a different response. And this isn't unique to CB1 and serotonin. It's also CB1 with dopamine. There's also CB1 with some of the opioid receptors. And there's a number of other heterodimeric complexes, but we're only in the beginning of starting to understand this. We're like in a very early stage of identifying this. So this is like something that is still pretty contentious even within like receptor pharmacology, but it is becoming more and more established that receptors aren't by themselves. In fact, it's not just this heteromer. It's not just CB1 and serotonin. It's actually an even larger complex that includes other enzymes and other transporters, and it makes sense for those of us who deal with reality. We're like, okay, it does make sense that we wouldn't make it isolated, but science is reductionist in a lot of ways. And I don't want to say science in a broad term. Maybe I'll say specifically structural biochemistry and drug discovery. Pharmaceutical sciences is very reductionist, and has for the past 100 years only been looking at things in isolation. And that the more we widen what we're looking for, the more we're like, oh, okay, there's actually a lot more here. And so where do these heterodimers occur? This is, if you look on the right, they're just color coded. This is the expression levels. This is the number of these receptors that are present. You see there's a huge amount of CB1 receptor, which is in orange, present in the cerebellum. And this is also from a public database. It's cited here. And something that's interesting is that cannabis consumption, specifically like high and regular cannabis consumption, is associated with an increased number of these CB1 5H2 heteromers, specifically in the olfactory bulb portion of our brains, which is for smell. And I think that's really interesting. We don't know, and I can't say anything else besides thinking that it's super interesting. And what, in my mind, I think about that being like, okay, well, that is me, right? So I have more of these heteromers, and what does that mean? What does that mean about a number of things? I don't particularly have a good sense of smell. So just as my N of one, I don't know exactly what it means, but it definitely means that there are likely other changes as well, because just because it's only presented in the olfactory, or it's only been found in the peer review in the olfactory, sometimes with academic research, that means that that's just the only place that they looked so far, or that they've been able to get published so far, or that they've been able to get grant funding to get published so far. Because again, most of the time, I think Liana was discussing this, and Dr. Rebecca was discussing this too, you have to get the grant funding and you have to frame it a certain way. So you're always looking for the research through some specific lens. And I didn't mention this, but all of this research that I've been doing is self-funded, and I don't have any support from the federal government for anything like this, or any private company for this research. So this is just because I'm interested, basically, and I'm sharing my special interest with all you, and I'm grateful for the space to do that. And now let's look at lived experience, because what does it actually mean? This comes from a cannabis data set, but I think that the value of observational real world data is really going to get its place in the coming years. Like, more and more people are starting to wake up to the fact that like a clinical setting is not going to be the best way to evaluate pretty much anything, when most of us don't live in the clinic 24/7. Actually, a huge majority of us like don't. And actually the population of people that psychedelics is targeting, my population of people specifically, are disenfranchised, intersectional, and most often have medical trauma and will not go to the doctor. Not that I'm advising anyone to ever do as I do, but I am not treated well there, and I have never been treated well there. So I don't like interfacing with the medical system. And also, they specifically don't want to treat people like me, or are very much so like, you shouldn't smoke weed or do psychedelics, which I understand because I meet the criteria for someone who shouldn't, while at the same time meeting the criteria for the person who has the most therapeutic gain. So this is from a real world. The data I'm going to show here comes from a real world data set. Now, This is the largest and most inclusive data set on high needs medical cannabis patients, and mostly neurodivergent and queer. And 11.7% of people also had psychedelics use. I gotta really go quickly here. This is the last data slides. Psychedelics co-use was more likely to correlate with substance moderation. So 39% of psychedelics co-use participants reported struggling with substance use versus only 33% of cannabis-only participants. That trend was also seen when we asked as a group whether people were trying to reduce substances actively, and what substances was that. So in blue, you can see the yes group. Blue is the percentage respondents of people who co-use cannabis and psychedelics together. And you can see that those of us who do, like my people, we are struggling with what is, I think, on a pretty generally understood to be a more harder or more like a more intense substance like opioids, stimulants, alcohol, pharmaceuticals, and nicotine, versus the group of people who was not co-using psychedelics. Their main things that they were struggling to moderate were like caffeine, sugar, and under the other category was like gambling, other eating disorders, and a number of other things that people were moderating, like specific substances. And so I'm going to wrap up because I'm over time. The summary is that there's undeniable evidence for theoretical molecular mechanism through the serotonin system, because the primary pharmaceutical targets that are already on the market for mental health already target them for. So in terms of it being breakthrough, it's like, great, it's breakthrough, but we also have already known it both traditionally for thousands and thousands of years in community knowledge, and in the pharmaceutical context of being like, we already have drugs on the market for a number of these targets and systems. There's a complex interplay between the endocannabinoid system and the serotonin system. It's not well understood in human populations whatsoever, and that the co-use of cannabis and psychedelics is associated with a percentage of participants that are interested in harm reduction, or in which harm reduction is an important part of our lives. That is me. We are both the most vulnerable and have the most to gain from these compounds. That's why public education is so important. And so my last piece about just like my personal view of resistance, my personal view of life is, what value should research add to humanity? My level of research is incredibly expensive. It requires a massive amount of funding, which is why almost everything that I presented to you here today was analysis of de-identified data sets that are public. And so what value does research add to humanity, and what amount of resources should be used like for this pure purpose of just patenting and profiting off of the molecules? And yeah, I just want to wrap up saying that my own personal sense of resistance in this is that I minimally touch psychedelics research outside of my own special interest, and public education, and in meeting and talking with other people in community, and with providing for a community that I have personally to me, with anyone who asks questions or anyone who wants access and wants to talk to me about different ways, ideas, dosing protocols. I'm so excited to talk with Akala about that later. And I don't want to interface with it professionally. And so I guess that's my personal active resistance, is that I don't think that my field of research and that pharmaceutical sciences, as of right now, I have not seen an ethical or reciprocal way to be involved in that. And not that I wouldn't be interested, because I'm nerdy and I love it and I love my field and I think it's really cool and I love shooting lasers at things. But I just think that it's complicated. And I said my word was contentious, because I don't think that my field, I have not seen people from my field be reciprocal or even acknowledge the right things in large public spaces when talking about their research. So I would like to acknowledge the POCPC. Thank you so much for the space of providing this for me, and my research partner at my nonprofit, Dr. Riley Kirk, who helped me with the recruitment and everything for our large data set. And then from More Better, Tyler and Kevin, they are my data software partners, and they help enable me to collect the large data set that was the cannabis co-use. So thanks so much. I hope I'm not too much over.
Thank you, Dr. Miyabi. Fabulous. You said so many amazing things, many that I understood and some that I might have to do a little bit more research on. Specifically, I love that you highlighted that so many of our indigenous traditions, they have a very firm grasp on the serotonistic system, how it works, and how many of our traditional ancestral substances, plants, herbs, beverages, foods, all of that, they nurture that system and they help us to be able to maintain homeostasis, right? Just by way of our natural day to day living, breathing, and ingesting things that will help boost some serotonin production versus being, destructive to it. So thank you so much for your information. I believe we'll be hearing more from you in the future. And you graced us with a gem. Research is me search. That is like unbelievable. I love that. Thank you so, so much. Our final speaker will be Dr. Sean Vigna. Dr. Sean is a sociologist at the University of the Incarnate Word, whose research examines psychedelics, health inequality, stigma, religion, and social policy. His work focuses especially on how psychedelic use and psychedelic policy affect marginalized communities, including racial and ethnic minorities, gender groups, and people facing social or structural disadvantage. Drawing from medical sociology, stigma theory, fundamental cause theory, and the stress process model, Dr. Vigna's research develops the framework of minorities' diminished psychedelic returns, which examines why the potential benefits of psychedelic use may be unevenly distributed across social groups. Dr. Sean, please educate us.
Hi, thank you for having me. I want to thank you, POCPC, right? Right. Am I get it right? Yes. The acronym. And then allowing this critical sociological lens on this. How do I share? Let me see if I share. This one. I think you should be able to see my screen now. Is that right?
Yes, we can see it. Thank
Just
you.
the presentation. Okay. So, yeah, so here's the title of my presentation is Everything Matters, Psychedelic Research and the Self-Induced Downfall of the Renaissance. My takeaway is going to be very simple. Everything matters. And drawing on a robust history of research in the medicine institution, there is significant potential for political backlash that could really stifle the needed social justice. And I want to start by just offering a little hopeful clarifications. I know this might seem a little down. Despite this provocative title, I'm not here to tear down the field. I'm here because I think the field can be stronger and more honest and a little bit more useful to the communities that it purports to say that we are going to be helping. So the first thing I want to put out on the table, and I wish I had known, I wish I knew people's perspectives when I saw the little cloud beforehand. A lot of you are probably more along the line. So you might already know this stuff, but maybe it's just affirming what you probably already know. The first thing is that there is a lot of research already showing unequal outcomes when it comes to this research, or when it comes to psychedelic use. In my work in related studies, we keep seeing what I called, and you talked about the diminished psychedelic returns. Psychedelic use is not associated with the same health benefits for everyone. And here's a list of some of the stuff, but there's a lot more research still coming out with the basically the same outcomes. If you've experienced any type of marginalization or you are in one of these groups that there is a status difference, you are probably going to be experiencing either a benefit or a negative net effect on these things. So less education, less income, employment status. Are you full-time employed or not? Associated with different health outcomes. Access to good healthcare. So private healthcare, people in private healthcare systems versus public healthcare systems. We know that public healthcare systems are pretty bad. That's already been mentioned. Race and ethnicity, gender, stigma. How do you feel about your mental health? Do you feel as if you're experiencing more stigma? So that means, are you in a community that doesn't want to talk about mental illness, or are you in a community that seems to have lots of resources around it, right? These sorts of variables seem to matter. Not just religious beliefs, but like how integrated are you within your community? And then all of these things are not operating singular. They're multiplying it across. So education matters, but it's actually affects race and ethnicity differently. Household size matters, but there's gendered consequences where women seem to be getting worse outcomes if they have higher, larger households than men, right? So all of these things are happening and they're happening unequal. So some of you are thinking like, okay, I get it. Why are we only hearing about this new research? Because you're probably all very well aware of all this positive stuff coming out. And that is again what we've talked about, or at least people have mentioned, but here's some of the startling data. This field, when it comes to the clinical trials, is horribly, horribly unequal. Horribly unequal. We've had multiple meta-analysis, but one that I'm citing has over 80% of participants in psychedelic-assisted therapy are non-Hispanic whites. Some of the most influential studies that are already in the phase 3 trials where it's less than 3% are African American. And then some are even worse, where they take all of the ethno-racial people and stick them in one group. They just call them ethno-racial other, right? These are at the stage, the MDMA trials, stuff coming out of Johns Hopkins. It doesn't say that make these trials useless, but we can't make universal claims around these, right? If these samples are overwhelmingly white and highly educated, we cannot generalize to the public. And it is important to know all of these claims out right now about the benefits are coming off of these tiny little populations. None of it is generalizable. There is no research out there right now that says psychedelics is good for Black people. We have a study that shows it. There is no research out saying a large population research saying psychedelics are good for Hispanic. Here is the research, right? All the stuff that you're seeing is just psychedelics is good for white people. That is all. That's all they're showing. And that's just because that's what the population is, right? It's not that saying that there's other anecdotal, but when we're talking about those clinical trials, they are only showing one population. So this is what the dominant research frame is, right? It's very powerful, but it's incredibly thin. And really, it looks like this. It is psychedelic therapy leads to better health. And to be clear again, it's the promise is real. I'm not going to like poo-poo all of this, right? This research is good. It's still good clinical trials, but it's very narrow, right? An arrow from therapy to better health is not the full story. All right, we already know this because if maybe you're familiar with this, you're hearing these conversations around something called set and setting, right? The mindset that a person brings in, and where these sorts of therapeutic sessions are taking place. But the clinical trials know that how a person feels when they go into it and how comfortable these settings are, the type of music, the type of preparation, the trust in the drug and the facilitator, all of those things matter, right? Emotional backgrounds that someone brings in, or the psychological insight, the integration afterwards. We know about this, and they're kind of taking it for granted. And so the research that I and a lot of others are asking is very simple. Sense setting matters, but where does that come from, right? We talk about this in terms of indigenous knowledge or some inequalities that different groups experience, right? All of these things are unequally distributed. So the first thing that I want anyone who's listening to think about is there's a language that we already use in sociology when it comes to the different resources, right? You're hearing set and setting, you should be replacing it with psychosocial resources, psychosocial and health resources, right? If a psychedelic experience opens something up, the next question is what holds that opening? And so we're really thinking about two broad categories. The first are the social resources, right? When you hear someone's like, oh, I was in a community, I was integrated. Well, we call that your social support system, right? How big your social support system matters. Are you an isolated person taking psychedelics, or are you in a very robust community? Do you have people you can trust versus not, right? All of those things are unequal. Same thing with something like self-esteem and optimism and mastery. These are the big categories when it comes to psychology, the big main psychological resources. And we know this for a fact when it comes to psychedelics and outcomes. Someone can take a drug, but if I come into it prepared and ready for a positive outcome, I'm more likely to have a positive outcome, right? And me coming from a community or from a background that's stigmatizing those things, I'm going to have a worse outcome, right? So all of these resources are mediating these things, right? Whether or not it's social supports or your healthcare access or your housing, your transportation, right? All of those things are going to lead to differences in your psychological well-being before you even take the drug, which is then going to affect the outcome. Right? So if we're really thinking it from a medical sociological perspective, this is the big model that you should all be kind of thinking about. Is this the medical medical, sociological, and social epidemiological psychological MSET model. All right. The key point in this is that you cannot isolate one mechanism, which is what psychedelic therapy consistently or psychedelic clinical trials keep trying to do. We're going to isolate down to one type of music. We're going to isolate down to one type of temperature. We're going to isolate down to just 30 minutes of care versus 1 hour of care. All of that is true, but the moment you step out of a clinic, none of that control matters anymore because you're back into society, right? All of these outcomes are shaped by what a person has. A clinical room can be carefully designed, but cannot erase the fact that people go back to families and jobs and neighborhoods and legal systems and healthcare systems, all of which are deeply unequal, right? We're going to go back to a system of medical mistrust, or I'm living in an urban environment versus a rural environment. Every single thing is going to matter, and all those things are contributing to these huge inequalities that we are now seeing. Right. So the easy example that I think is a good way to perceive this, because gender, I think a lot of people here are going to be able to understand gender pretty easily. Imagine two people using the same substance in a similar setting, right? You have a man or a woman, maybe even a married couple, right? But we know there's differences in familial care, right? In an average family, women do more care work than men, right? Gender changes the stress exposure, how much caregiving responsibility, right? Stigma attached to drug use. A man and a woman have different perceptions when it comes to drug use, who they can talk to about it, right? Men are much more likely to be able to talk openly about drug use than women, right? And all of these things are going to affect what it is, not to mention just biological differences, right? We just have the social world on top of it. Then add something like race and immigration and income and policing and disability and everything on top of that. And all of that changes the meaning and the resources and every single outcome. So not one substance is the same under any social condition. How much more time do I have? I feel like I'm.
You got about 3 minutes, honey.
Got it. All right. So why does this all matter? I think the bigger question isn't just what happens if we're ignoring all these inequalities? It's what happens to this social movement if we ignore this. Okay, what happens if the movement of all these inequalities ignores? What happens if we are making all these promises of a renaissance while we keep seeing these inequalities building up? We have to remember, and it's been pointed out, that right now the average American really distrusts our medical system. There is great research showing 70% of adults say the U.S. healthcare system is in crisis, or JAMA has talked about, was it only 40% actually trust doctors today? Most people distrust pharmaceutical companies. And so we're thinking about this alternative medicine, but right now we have this structure around research around these policies, which is not changing the medical system. It's just absorbing psychedelics into a broken system, and then overlaying all of those bad systems all the mistrust, all of the inequalities on top of psychedelics. Right. Man, I don't have a lot of time left. So I'm just gonna go this. I'll end here. So where do we begin? So I think the first thing is we have to really stop framing psychedelics as the answer. Full stop. There's a lot we can support decriminalization and research and harm reduction without pretending that these drugs solve all these social sufferings. We have to be honest about monopolization. When the legal path right now, when it requires expensive therapy and expensive certification and professional gatekeeping, the communities are going to start to notice that. They're going to start to notice that, and these drugs, which can be beneficial, a lot of people are going to mistrust them just like they mistrust every other medical treatment that's being pushed onto them. So if this field keeps promising all this liberation while just inserting psychedelics into a broken system, while building this system of scarcity and profit, it's going to be operating within this general system of mistrust And then we're going to have political backlash. And then we're going to have cultural backlash. And then we're going to have whole communities that are just not going to buy into this, just like they don't buy into a lot of other things. So the goal should not be to sell drugs. The goal should be to ask better questions. And so I think what we should be thinking about, rather instead of saying how do we get drugs or psychedelics to people, is what do people, communities actually need? Right? If we start from that question of what do they need, oftentimes we're going to come to the conclusion that no, they don't need drugs. They need something like better healthcare to access to healthcare, or better employment, or safety, or demilitarizing their neighborhoods, right? A whole bunch of other things. Parental care. There are so many other things that can be done for communities to make them better besides trying to numb them with drugs to just make them feel better about the trauma that they're experiencing. So I'll end it right there. I know we're going over. I feel like, yeah, I went rambling. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
did great. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Sean. You brought up some amazing points, specifically about how important integration is for people of color, and that even despite having these mystical and powerful experiences, a lot of folks have to return to a life, a world that is still full of inequalities, still suffering from lots of instability, and just, needing more support from society that a plant medicine experience can't give you. So thank you so much for your perspective. It is highly valued, and I think we'll all be better for understanding that psychedelics is not a cure for social sufferings at all. It's merely a tool that we have available to help us start to really uncover the deeper issues that have just ingrained themselves in our society. So we will transition to Thomas, another longtime member of POCPC, and he'll lead us through our Q&A session, where we can have some of the questions that folks have submitted to our presenters, and they can give us some more wisdom. Thomas?
Excellent. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, you know how I am. I'm never sure if I'm muted. I want to just start with a question that is directed to Rebecca. Rebecca, having worked with so many different maestros, can you speak to how widespread the issue of misogyny and sexual abuse is among Indigenous practitioners?
It's prevalent. It's a huge issue. There are two paper oh, there's one paper that comes to mind on that, which is a chapter by Daniela Peluso in 2010 about the using ayahuasca for exploitation. It's a huge issue, and it really um it really compromises women's safety, especially women researchers who are often in the field alone. Um, yeah, it's a humongous issue. I don't know where to start or begin with that. We can just say it's a huge issue, and there needs to be a lot of work done in that space.
Thank you, Rebecca. This one seems to be directed to anyone in the group on the panel. Why is there not a wide array of intersectionality and the continual domination of whiteness and heteronormativity?
I think
Anyone
it's
want
because
to
you
take
have to
that?
be privileged. Oh, sorry. I was just saying, I think that you have to be privileged to even get into research, and that there is a huge barrier to entry that, like, I understand and have parsed a lot, like what enabled me to even be in a position where I was being paid less than minimum wage during my PhD for 5.5 years, living
Wow.
in Greater Boston on less than 30K a year or something like that. Like, why was I able to be able to do that and had the privilege of being into research and had like the privilege of being able to do unpaid internship, do my undergraduate degree, right? So I was on a water polo scholarship when I went to be an undergrad. So like I think this is just from my own perspective, but also what I see mirrored when I see who stays in academia. In addition, like there's a reason why I'm not there anymore also. And it's like, what can you endure? And what are you willing to endure? Is I think another question. I think Liana touched on it in her experiences as well. So I think when it comes to who stays in academia, because it is only a so first there's a barrier getting into academia, there's a privilege associated with getting into it, and then there's whether or not you can stay, and like how that environment, is it uplifting you, is it grinding you down while tokenizing you, is it constantly invalidating you, is it constantly misgendering you, is it it though there's just a I think that I'm going to stop speaking now, but I think it has to do with like what allows people to stay. And again, with like being privileged, like I am associated with a research university right now, like that privilege of being able to go back and make that relationship, but not have them be my primary employer for the last few years is a privilege as well. And if I had to go back and work for a university as a primary employer, I likely would not. I actually know I would not. I was working at a farm and on a restaurant instead of that because I could not tolerate the environments that are necessary as a biochemist to tolerate, mostly the white men that I have to work with as a biochemist. So I think that that's a component too, because like who is loving that environment, I guess, is like is and who is thriving in that environment. And then those are the people who stick around, and those are the people who get the most citations, and those are the people who get the most opportunities. And then it's a self-fulfilling cycle, I think. And that's just I think there are other factors too, but I think that like I think privilege plays a huge role in it because yeah, it's the environment is different. Everyone is experiencing a different world just in general. But especially if we're talking about academic research spaces, which tend to be what people are referring to when we're like mainstream research.
Thank you. This one is directed towards
So
Liana.
could I? Oh, I wanted
Yes.
to answer that one too, just a bit.
Oh, please do.
So I also wanted to share, like, from a counseling or like clinical psychology space, that the term intersectionality is relatively new in our field to begin with. And so when we look at intersectionality in the field of psychedelic research and science, it actually makes our outcomes more complex, right? Because then we need to acknowledge more nuanced subjective experiences. And when you have such nuanced experiences that can have such an array of outcomes, it actually makes it a bit difficult to have a reductionist perspective to that research study in and of itself, right? So I feel like intersectionality can kind of complicate research and then by proxy sort of complicate some of the movements that we're seeing in the psychedelic renaissance right now, especially when it comes to political efforts. If we really want to show that psilocybin is effective for treatment-resistant depression, there are so many layers to people's identities as as Dr. Sean was sharing as well. Like there are so many layers or subjectivities that will pop up that may complicate that outcome, that may also complicate the movement in and of itself, right? When we're really just looking to show that simple direct line that Dr. Sean was showing, like, okay, this is the psychedelic and this is how it helps people. But there's so much that happens in between there. And I think the last thing that I wanted to share too is it's not necessarily that people with multiple marginalized identities aren't interested or curious about psychedelics. I think it's truly like we don't know if this is the space for us just yet, especially at the intersection of counseling clinical psychology and psychedelic research. Because in the field of psychology, in and of itself, do we really have a standardized, culturally responsive care for psychedelic folks, for people who are spiritual? We really do not. So I think at this point in time, there's this dominance of white rhetoric and heteronormativity in psychedelic research because that comes from um, the field of psychology in and of itself. But I think also, too, we don't really have the education to uphold those intersectional identities just yet and to train people so that they can appropriately hold that space in a culturally responsive way.
Thank you. Um, Next question. Are there connections between psychedelic research and mycoremediation? How could the two fields overlap? And this is a person asking as a scientist interested in making a connection.
Can you explain what micro remediation is? I don't know what that means.
Mycoremediation, I would assume, is remediation of something using mycelium.
Usually it's like plastics and toxins and like typically it's like the remediation of other compounds that are like forever chemicals that we
Ah,
are eternally spewing into our soils and
that
such
that
and
would be
air and
micro
water.
remediation. This is the term as the person wrote it into the chat. Or I think this one
No,
might have,
myco, like it's the use of fungi to do that,
there we go.
essentially. Or
Okay. All
yeah.
right. Okay. And that would be the connection then. Anyone have anything else to say on that? This one is for Sean. Is there any psychedelic research being done on populations with more complex trauma patterns than veterans, especially those with relational trauma?
I didn't have a chance to mention it. I'm actually co-editing a special issue for Women in Therapy on psychedelics, gender, and psychotherapy, and we're going to be looking at intersectionality, equity, and emerging feminists. We already have 20 submissions. We're going to be editing it. But yes, there actually is quite a few really good studies out there that we got a whole well, people have submitted their research. They're looking at very, very complex. Funny enough, though, still stuff coming from the VA, just looking at different populations within the VA. So we have a couple studies that are looking at like through the VA because they got money, LGBTQ communities. So it's an overlaying of both queer communities, military trauma, and other racial traumas on top of that. So there's some really, really interesting research coming out. And I think the most interesting part of it is that almost all of these studies are not looking at it from a straight psychedelic assisted therapy. They're all looking at it from these alternative forms of therapy that they're taking, which is better for these groups. Which is going to be very, very fascinating as we start reading these stories. So yes, there's actually some really good research out there. But the only thing is small populations. A lot of it is small populations now because the research is going in one direction with just how can we pump it in as fast as possible, and then that ends up being who's available, which is single white guys that are in and around these college campuses wherever they're doing it, right? So those are the ones that they keep getting access to, or on these on base, right? So it's small population, but there are good studies out there now that are looking at these alternatives.
I have two more questions here, just to the moderator. Do we have time to do these?
I believe so.
All right. This is for Miyabi, and the next question is also for Miyabi. Do you think that these results can explain more about the entourage effect and the feedback loop that can enhance regulation with a compilation of compounds rather than isolates? Same goes for mushrooms and various compounds working together.
I think there's going to be a super long answer, but the short answer is just yes. And that like chemical diversity is so important. And even within ourselves, the word entourage effect that people usually associate with cannabis and with the aromatic compounds in cannabis, like terpenes and other volatiles, like sulfur compounds and esters and ketones. So people usually refer to that as the entourage, including like anthocyanins. They're the molecules that make it purple. And people are like, oh, the entourage effect of like everything in cannabis that leads to cannabis's effects. That's like the popular understanding of the word entourage effect. But that term was actually coined in academia describing our entourage effect inside our own bodies with our endocannabinoid system. So the term entourage effect actually comes from our bodies. And the system, like the fats specifically in our bodies, endocannabinoids like 2-AG and like anandamide, but we also have endocannabinoids that have serotonin stuck to them. It's like serotonin. The name is not sexy. It's like serotonin, arachidonyl acid, blah, blah, blah. But we have a bunch of molecules within ourselves. Like we have chemical diversity and every living thing has chemical diversity. So yes, I do think that can begin to explain it. I think that similar to what Sean was describing about how the population set gets smaller and smaller the more you look at it. It's the same thing goes when you're looking at complex compounds. Is that like the populate? If you're studying a group of people who were interested in chemical diversity, then we really have to be studying people who are using the same formulations in the same settings, in the same et cetera. And then your number of people becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And so that's part of why we're hoping eventually to go things on bigger scales and then be able to see things like that. But like, I definitely think that that's part, and the entourage of just multiple systems as well. Like, I'm a big believer of polypharmacy personally, and polypharmacy not just in terms of like within one type or subtype of natural compound, but like I take chaga every day. Those are like polyphenols and like sugars, and they're anti-inflammatory, and that has been like a huge game changer for my GI issues. And like use passion flower teas and dandelion teas. I like hibiscus teas have MAOIs, which are antidepressant in mechanism. So anyone who likes Jamaica drink, like it's for me an antidepressant. So, but yes, the answer is yes.
And the last question also falls to Miyabi. Are you saying that my standard practice of always buffering serotonergic, I messed that up twice. I'm not going to try it again. Psychedelics with cannabis has a basis in neurochemistry?
Yeah, answer to that is also yes, but no one wants to talk about it because it's similar to talking about cannabis with mental health, which is surprising that no one wants to talk about that also, considering how much we talk about it with psychedelics and mental health. In a similar way, people don't want to link cannabis to psychedelics. People would like to keep that separate. And when I mean people, I'm saying like white pharmaceutical scientists that want to make psychedelics into a pill that does operate totally in this like very clean, very like medical, very like it will be covered by our health insurance because we're going to charge you $300 per gram or something crazy, whatever it is in Oregon that I saw like a couple of years ago where I was like, that is wild when you could grow them out of a shoebox. And then it's like that is an intentional separation of those two things. And that the answer is yes, but also to be careful with it because the synergy means that there's one single paper out there that's been published on a self-reported study from like, I think it was like from a pretty small data set. And it showed that when you combine cannabis with psychedelics, that if you do low doses of both, you see more positive effects. If you do low doses to medium doses with both, you still see positive therapeutic like synergy. And then all of a sudden, when you get into high doses of both, you're not having a good time. And I think a lot of people have had and understand that experience. So like when I talk to people about that in a practical sense, I'm like, okay, well, serotonergics can upset your stomach and cannabis really helps with that. But usually when your stomach is being upset, it's when you're on a coming up part of absorbing and like starting to be in this beginning portion of the medicine. So like there's things to be wary about with there. Another thing is that if you're inhaling cannabis, it only lasts for an hour versus the classic serotonergic psychedelics can last for up to 12 hours. So there is a buffering and a prolonging. And I think that like for most people, I think one of the most beneficial uses of cannabis is in a prolonging of positive therapeutic benefits as you're even in the process of coming down and integrating. I think there's huge benefits there. I think there's huge benefits with cannabis the next day, being able to like bump up and have like in a different brain state. And again, I'm always using cannabis. Like I've been consuming cannabis daily for like 20 years. So it's pretty much like never not. Like for me personally, I'm also just like never not consuming cannabis. So that's a different scenario, but I think that many of us also fall under that scenario. So not everyone, but yes, I think that the neurochemistry behind it means that it could be useful. I also find the biggest use for it is that you can use less of the serotonergic compounds because I am part of the high risk group of people when it comes to just in general substance use. And so I do try to stay below certain thresholds because the ability for there to be something that has a negative effect is actually like greater in sometimes depending on the setting, whatever, but also dosage. And you can with cannabis use less and obtain different but similar levels because there is like that level of synergy. So there is a neurochemical mechanism behind it. There's very, very limited data in the peer review. There's tons of information within the community. And then everything in between. So, I think, the answer is yes, there's molecular mechanism there, but no one is trying to touch that with a 10-foot pole because people are trying to keep them very separate. They have very separate images, right? Like cannabis is the jazz musician and Mexican drug. That's what the government wants us to believe psychedelics are this super clean Timothy Leary like thought leader or white person. You know, that's not true. We know that's not true. I'm just saying that's the very public portrayal of them in my field, at least.
I love the way you put that. That concludes our questions. I don't think I've missed any, but it's possible.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for handling questions. I just want to take a second to just pause and give gratitude for this space today. I've already learned so much, both from our panelists, the conversations happening in the chat. I think back to that word cloud that we created earlier, and we had all of these kind of negative connotations around psychedelic research. And then we got into this knowledge sharing space, right? We didn't have to go to the white researchers to tell us a way to combat some of the digestive issues on come up and things like that. This is a really beautiful example of what research can be when it is this collective knowledge sharing. So one, just want to honor and give gratitude to every single person in the space today, including our panelists. And then two, we do have a final activity today that is going to help us. Yes, probiotics, those are the best. And so we do have a final activity today, and it's this thing called Padlet. So I'm going to share my screen. First, I'm going to drop a link in the chat. I would love for everyone to click the link that I'm dropping in the chat and join me in this thing called Padlet. And I'm going to share my screen here in just one moment. Maybe my computer's being a little funky with me, so give me 1 second, y'all. All right. Sorry, there it is. So Padlet, I believe I mentioned earlier, is this really cool platform that lets you document what you are learning. So if you can see my screen, can someone just give me a quick thumbs up?
It's
Kayla,
showing
we see
your
your Zoom screen.
Oh, okay, so you see yourself. Give me 1 sec. Let me fix that. There we go. Now I got it. Yes.
Perfecto. Thank you.
Lovely. So this is Padlet. It's this really cool thing that you can use in a variety of different spaces. I love to use it for teaching and learning. And so today's, as we're wrapping up our event, I'm going to show you all how to drop the things that you learned. So when you go into Padlet, you will notice that there is a little yellow button in the bottom right-hand corner. You can click there where it says post, and then you can write down something that you learned, a question that you still have, or a piece of like a resource or a reading or something that you've already engaged with that you would like to share with the group. So you can type a subject in here. So maybe my subject is I love research. And then there are a bunch of different options to add images. You can take a picture of yourself. You can add links. I personally do love a good GIF. So I'll throw in my little excited one. Let's find one. So this is how I'm feeling. And then I'll put, I have learned so many new ways of engaging with plant medicine. And then you click submit. You can add your name. And once you submit it, it is added to our board. So again, I invite everyone to click on that link that I sent in the chat and start to add things that you learned from today's session. I'm also going to drop some questions in the chat to help guide you through that. You might be hopefully not seeing my screen right now, but if you are, we'll be okay. So I'm going to drop these questions in the chat, and you all can feel free to add whatever post you would like to this board. I'm going to repost the questions that we had posted on our social media pages earlier this week. Sorry, try to get back into Zoom here. I'm going to post those so that we can use those as our base. And everyone can just drop essentially, what have you learned today? In addition to what have you learned today, are there things that you already knew before coming into this space that you would like to share with the group? Whether that is, information like we were sharing in the chat about different things to help with your digestion, or we can also throw in, additional questions, things that you want to explore. This is just a time for us to document what we accomplished today, what that collective knowledge sharing looked like. So I definitely invite all of you to go ahead. I think you can see my screen. Click post in the bottom right-hand corner and start to post the things that are coming up for you after being in this. There we go. Thank you, Diana. Thank you so much for posting. Ooh, noted about the saffron during pregnancy. So this is, yes, a space for you all to document what you learned today, what you would like to continue learning, and any resources that you would like to share with the group. So I'm going to drop the link to the Padlet one more time. This is something that we will all be able to keep and review later and look at the different resources that we've shared with each other today. I'm going to drop the link to the Padlet one more time. So if you click that, you can join us in here. And we'll take about 2 minutes for everyone to just drop notes. Thank you to those who have already dropped one. Yes, absolutely. Plant intelligence is a force of nature. It is lovely to know that there's research happening outside of the standard mainstream pharmaceutical funnel and pipeline. You know, today's event was research. We really got to see like what our group thinks about current psychedelic research. We got to do so much knowledge sharing. And yeah, we get to also document that and save it in this really cool digital platform. So please continue adding. And this page will just grow and grow, which is really exciting. Again, if you have any resources, I know Diana, you shared a really awesome article with me last week. I can drop it in here as well. But yes, there's so many different things that we can share in here and learn more together. So continue to drop the things that you've learned, the things that you want to share, the ways that you're feeling right now as you bring in all of this information and then decide how you're going to integrate it into your life. I know that we're a little bit over time, so we will have Liz from the collective wrapping us up here in just a second. We're going to give it about 1 more minute to let folks drop their learnings, and then we will get into our closing statements. Yes, definitely a lot of appreciation for our panelists. Cool. Yes, that the intersectionality adds nuance that threatens Western medical systems. Yes. Thank you, Diana, for what you dropped in the chat. I'm going to add it to the Padlet. No. Perhaps I will. There we go.
And this Padlet will be a living, breathing thing. So you can, if you want to go away and come back to it, just keep the link, maybe bookmark it on your device, and it'll be a evergreen resource for us to, people are sharing books, links, anything. This is kind of our way to stay connected in this very beautiful container that we've created. And if you need to reference back anything that you learned today. So this is a beautiful activity. Thank you so much, Arkayla. We are very grateful for your help.
I'm really happy to be here. Like I said, I am excited to learn all of this. I already know that I will just be able to grow and heal so much just for being in this space today. And I'm going to pass the mic over to Liz. You all can feel free to continue adding to this Padlet. I will stop sharing my screen. Continue to add, and we will definitely be sharing this Padlet later. And yeah, just continue to add the things and continue to knowledge share, and just deep, deep gratitude to everyone in attendance today. And I'll pass it over to Liz.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for participating and researching with us. I learned so much. We have learned so much from all of our panelists, and it's through our collective integration of what we've learned today that we can enact meaningful changes in our lives. So I have the honor of closing this event. I'll do that by offering a little bit of personal story sharing to launch us into our event integration. And then I'll wrap up by inviting you to join us in community. So, hi everyone, my name is Liz Sablon Rodriguez. I use she, her pronouns. I'm calling from Multnomah, Chinook, and Clackamas lands, also known as Portland, Oregon.
I identify as a neuroscientist, so I'm a survivor of Western science higher ed. I'm an educator, a child of immigrants. I am Chamorro, Micronesian, and Malayali, Southern Indian. I'm alter-abled. I live with chronic disease. I'm a survivor of childhood trauma, including CSA. I navigate the world with complex PTSD. And I live in diaspora while estranged from my family. And I am on an active decolonial journey. So I've been with POCPC for about 2 to 3 years, and I joined with the desire to uplift BIPOC healing and self-actualization. And I'm deeply interested in how we can use psychedelics to support our journey home, our journey to self, to reconnect with our ancestral roots, and move us closer towards self-determination. So I'm going to launch into a little bit of story sharing and remind us that storytelling is research and that research is ceremony. So I mentioned earlier that I'm Chamorro. Chamorro people are indigenous to the Mariana Islands in Micronesia, and we are a U.S. territory. So what used to be my family's land was stolen by the US government and turned into a military base. And that military base that was my family's land and some extended family's land is now the subject of a Supreme Court case where the federal government wants to make sure that Indigenous people cannot sue the military for environmental damage. And so this is a lot to carry, right? Chamorros have the highest representation among veterans, but they can't even vote for president. And in order to get a counseling appointment, they have to fly all the way to Hawaii. And so this can make it sometimes feel like the push to use psychedelics to support veterans and PTSD, it sometimes feels a little disingenuous, especially with the lack of BIPOC representation and acknowledging who's actually going to benefit from that research. So I'm not looking for ways to use psychedelics to grease the wheels of the industrial war machine. Instead, I'm looking to use psychedelics to abolish it. And so I'm looking for ways to first cope and survive the oppressive systems we live in without losing myself. But more importantly, I'm interested in using psychedelics and psychedelic research to support self-determination. So it is an immense weight to carry to have all of these marginalized identities and to have this historical oppression and trauma that we carry on a daily basis. So I really appreciated hearing about research today that focuses on our people and is by our people and takes a critical lens and isn't afraid to name the ways in which psychedelic research falls short in how it serves our community. And so I was really heartened to hear our panelists today speak about facing internal resistance, decolonizing our minds, because I think that is the first step to work to actual decolonization and indigenation. Thank you so much, Dr. Rebecca, for reminding us the importance of building long-term relationships and challenging dominant ideology. And I think it's so important for us to keep asking that question of who's actually benefiting from the way psychedelics are accessible to us in this country. And I thank all of our panelists for helping us work towards that broader and deeper understanding of what research is and what it can be. I'd also like to remind us that we are so much more than a response to our oppressive forces that we exist within. And I think it's through the use of entheogens that we can dare to imagine a bold future that we've never experienced before. So among the Chamorros, there's a talk of self-determination. Do we stay as a territory? Do we vote to become our own independent nation? What do we want to do? What does the future entail? And in order to vote most authentically, I think we need to be able to dissolve the social constructs that exist as barriers in our lives. And for me, that's one of the most important benefits of psychedelics is to dissolve social constructs. That helps me realize how these oppressive forces were just manufactured. And when we dissolve those social constructs, to me, that is a journey home, a journey to return to self, a journey to return to indigeneity, who we've always been before these layers of colonization got in the way. And we need to be brave and bold to imagine and believe in that future. And I think that psychedelics and entheogens can help assist with trusting that journey back home, trusting that when we remove those barriers of colonization, there's nothing new to create. It's a return home to who we've always been. And so I think that psychedelics can assist with that brave imagination and that brave trust in who we can be. Okay, I'm speaking from the heart, so I might have forgotten a few things. But I might just wrap up that story sharing there. And just remind us that all from my perspective, that when I dissolve those social constructs, that helps me cultivate intersectionality because that helps me see how we are all interconnected in the ways that not only we are oppressed by colonial systems, but also in the way that we are all the same, and that our journey home brings us all to the same home, and that we can believe in that future through the use of entheogens and through community and through solidarity. Now I'll wrap up. So thank you so much for letting me offer that personal share. If you would like to continue this conversation, if any of these topics resonated with you, I would love to continue this conversation with you. You can find me at liz@pocpc.org. Most importantly, I would love to continue this conversation with you. We would love to invite you to join us in community. There are many ways that you can do that. One easy way is to sign up for our newsletter. That's a great way to keep up to date with the events and offerings that we have. That's how you can find out when our third workshop will be. That's scheduled to be a town hall among the Psychedelic Alliance for Healing and Justice. So that will be an excellent event. Please sign up for our newsletter. And you can find out about that third event in this series. We are also recruiting. We would love you to join us at POCPC. And so if you join our newsletter, you'll find out when we open applications. We'd really love to expand our community, and it would be great to have you as a part of our community. Please keep up to date with our blogs and our publications. And we would be so honored if you ever felt like offering a donation to support the work that we do. Thank you from the bottom of all of our hearts. I'll take pause in case any of our panelists or planning committee wants to chime in. Otherwise, I will just send all of my love and gratitude to everyone who participated today. Thank you so, so much. We invite you to sign off as it feels right and to continue with the integration into your daily lives. Thank you so much.
I will add in the link to sign up for our newsletters is in the chat. I'm also dropping our donation link. Please invite the other folks of color that you know that would be interested in being in this space. There were, I think, 43 of us on this call. If each of us invite another person next time, we'll have almost 100 folks knowledge sharing. So each one teach one, each one reach one. Please send out that link to have folks sign up for our newsletters. Thank you so much, Liz, for such a beautiful way of closing out. Bring more friends into the work, y'all. It's such a beautiful space that we get to hold with each other.
Much love, everybody. Thank you for participating. Thank you to all our panelists, all of our POCPC members, everybody. This has been so, so beautiful, way beyond what we could have ever anticipated. So thank you so much for sharing. And we will look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you all.